The Prime Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we've just heard from that great sycophant of billionaires, the leader of the opposition, and we are going to make our country great again.
Each and every Thursday afternoon, we look forward to talking to Mark Latham. He joins me on the phone this afternoon. Hello, Mark. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Brent. How are you going?
Good, thank you, mate. Having a busy week. You've got a busy week. We've got a lot to talk to, so let's get stuck into it.
Yeah, for sure.
I see that the Victorian Labor delegates are going to be urged to end offshore processing and bring the refugees and asylum seekers on Manus Island and Nauru to Australia. Now, if this goes ahead, though, it flies in the face of what Labor's all about, is it not?
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of people in the Labor caucus who've learned absolutely nothing from their experience last time in government. The Rudd and Gillard governments presided over the worst humanitarian disaster in Australian history. The open border policy meant that 50,000 boat people were trying to gain entry to Australia, and tragically 4% of them drowned. That's the official Immigration Department statistics. So 2,000 people drowned on the waters between Indonesia and Australia. Now, if you haven't got offshore processing, that is, you allow the boats to land on Australian soil and to process the asylum seekers here, well, it's a gold-plated invitation for the people smugglers in Indonesia to start up their trade. Now, you can say that the humane thing is to let people sail here, but they're on rickety boats that are known to sink. It's an illegal people smuggling trade. I just don't see how Labor can present itself credibly with this sort of motion being presented, because it's a recipe for many, many more hundreds of people to drown at sea, including infant children, under a Labor government. It's just completely crazy.
Bill Shorten will probably face. I suppose they say that if Bill Shorten's expected to face pressure about the motion, is he not?
Well, his problem is that if there was a free vote in the Labor caucus, they would abolish offshore processing. And right. You heard the new member for Batman, Jed Carney, former head of the trade union movement, saying that that's her stance, to get rid of the offshore processing. And you know, we heard this from Kevin Rudd when he was in opposition, that he was going to be in favour of strong borders. They got into government, they abolished the Pacific solution, and the rest was just one great tragedy. Now, the real risk here is that in government, Shorten would have to give in to these lunatics on the left of the party, and many on the right of the party who haven't learnt the lessons. You know, what I find really frustrating is that anyone in politics could look at that experience, watch 2,000 people drown and think, okay, let's do the policies again that cause that outcome. You know, you'd have to be really, really dumb or so ideologically obsessed with open borders that you don't care about the people drowning.
Yeah, true. As the saying goes, it beggars belief, doesn't it?
Well, it does. Don't you find it amazing that, you know, part of life obviously is to learn from past mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. This is a tragic error. Wouldn't you think they'd learn from it?
I think we see in politics each and every day these days, Mark, where people don't learn from their previous mistakes. Well,
I think that's part of the public disillusionment, that the public look at evidence and think, well, that didn't work. Why would anyone in their right mind talk about it again for the future?
Yeah, true. Now, Luke Foley's on the front page of the Telegraph today. What did he say? That he's put the issue of white flight in Western Sydney on the political agenda. He's warned that many Anglo families are being forced to move out of struggling suburbs facing a slow decline. And I see that also today, as a result of this, Pauline Hanson has come out and she said she absolutely agrees with Luke Foley. And there are certain suburbs in Western Sydney, according to Pauline Hanson, whereby she says that the police are getting to the stage where they're not game to enter those suburbs.
Well, there's certainly a concentration of some law and order issues in places like Marylands and Guildford. We had the problem of the drive-by shootings. That was concentrated in certain areas. You know, again, you have to judge the evidence, and the evidence shows that a lot of the migration and refugee settlement patterns have been a disaster in Sydney, that the Baird government said, let's bring 7,000 Syrian refugees in. They promised that they'd go settle in Coffs Harbour and Armidale and Wagga and Albury. And more than 6,000 of the 7,000 went to one local government area, that's Fairfield, in Western Sydney. Crowded schools, it's got the highest unemployment rate already. This is the sort of problem that Foley's talking about, that you have to have some regard for where the migrants settle. And it's okay for people in Balmain and Glebe and Mossman to say, bring in the refugees, bring in the refugees. Only a handful ever settle in those suburbs. And thousands, many thousands go to places like Fairfield. And if you want to breed ethnic enclaves into the future, you want to have people disconnected from employment and active participation in society, that's the way to do it. So I think Foley at the Labor leadership level is calling out a massive problem. He's speaking about reality. And I've got to say, in terms of the phrase white flight, I first used that 20 years ago to say there's a real issue here. There's a lot of people, Anglos, who move to the urban fringe because they don't like what's happening to their traditional suburbs closer to the city centre. And the Labor left went berserk, as you'd expect, when I said those words, white flight. Yeah. And Foley's saying it 20 years later. Brent, this has been going on for 30 years, and Foley really is coming in right at the end of the evidence. So good on him for saying it, and hopefully government learns those lessons of what happened with the Syrian refugees in Fairfield.
What does government do, though, with the situation that they have now? How do they stop it? How do they reverse these enclaves?
Well, if you can't settle people in a dispersed pattern, if you can't get them into Albury, Wagga, Coffs Harbour and Armidale, don't have special intake of thousands of refugees going to just one spot. Don't do it. Because if you want to create ethnic enclaves and welfare and social problems into the future, you know, and it's counter to what multiculturalism was supposed to be. Multiculturalism was supposed to be, you know, there'd be an English family next to a traditional Australian, next to Greek, next to Italian, traditional Australian, Middle Eastern. You know, we'd be an integrated, mixed society. That was the promise. Nobody said in the 70s, oh, this will end up with ethnic enclaves where essentially, if you go through the centre of Fairfield now, it's little Middle East, and they've got even signs to that effect. Right. So nobody spoke of multiculturalism that way. It's not good for the people coming in. It's not good for integration in Australia. There's a lack of English language skills in places like Fairfield. We can't talk to each other. How can we build a stronger society? I mean, these are basic mistakes that government have made, and again, there's no sign that they learn from this, you know. Where's the Berejiklian government or the Turnbull government saying, look, that Fairfield experience was a disaster. We won't be doing it that way into the future.
Yet another example, Mark, where politicians aren't listening to what the people want.
Or the evidence on the streets. You know, one of the problems with, you know, and I think good on Foley for saying this today, one of the problems with these suburbs he talks about in Western Sydney, very, very safe electorates. Nobody goes there in the election campaigns. They're not marginal seats. You don't see the TV cameras and the scrutiny of an election campaign. Safe seats, and the problems are forgotten. So good on him for blowing the whistle on the obvious.
Malcolm Turnbull has personally intervened to save, is it Anne Sudmalis from a pre-selection defeat? She was going to be replaced by a younger man.
Well, if he had more ability, he should have got the job. And in this debate about women MPs in the Liberal Party, they overlooked the fact they've just picked Georgina Downer to be the candidate in Mayo for the by-election where she should win. They've also picked a woman to replace George Brandis in their Queensland Senate delegation. So, you know, I think the golden rule is pick people on merit. If someone's got the ability, put them in the seat. If someone's not serving the electorate, sorry, you face a pre-selection challenge, you should go out, whether you're male, female, straight, gay, whatever you are. None of those things should matter. It should be your ability and the way you've served your electorate. And there's a whole bunch of stuff. We hear all this talk about gender equity. There's a whole bunch of studies that academics have brought together now showing that changing the gender balance of a company or a parliament doesn't improve its performance, because inevitably you bring in people from exactly the same type of political culture. Whether it's a male or female in that seat of Gilmore, they're probably a product of the Liberal Party machine. And, you know, that's probably the issue in terms of public trust, that they serve the party and the machine ahead of the people. And unless you're fundamentally changing culture, you don't get a better result. And the evidence shows clearly, and we saw this at AMP and the banks out of the Royal Commission, just changing the gender of people on a corporate board doesn't improve performance.
Mark, you said ability then. That word stuck in my mind because someone who I don't think's been picked for the role for her ability would have to be Sarah Hanson Young. And she's claimed she did not check a statement her office set out, which accurately claimed that Australia Day marked the date Captain James Cook sailed into Botany Bay. And, of course, it came out by way of a press release. Accusing Communications Minister Mitch Fifield. In fact, we've got a little bit of audio here. We recorded this. This was what was said
Despite an important national debate about changing the date of Australia Day away from Captain Cook's landing at Botany Bay, the government has decided to spend taxpayer money it is stripping from the ABC on yet another monument to Captain Cook on the land of the Dharawal people.
Of course, he had a press release accusing Mitch Fifield of ignorance for being unable to name the traditional owners of Botany Bay. Sarah Hanson Young herself incorrectly linked Australia Day with Captain Cook's arrival in 1770, Mark. And this is not the first time.
It's an amazing error. I mean, Hanson Young and the Greens are part of this movement every January to say change the date. Change the date, change the date. Let's get rid of the 26th of January because it's disrespectful to Indigenous people. Well, it's disrespectful to Australian history not to understand the truth about the 26th of January, that it's the First Fleet settlement of Australia at Sydney Cove that we mark on the 26th of January. That's why it's called Australia Day. It's not to do with the discovery of Australia 18 years earlier by Captain Cook in 1770. So, you know, they don't even know what they're trying to change. They parrot this line, change the day, but it turns out Hanson Young doesn't even know what she wants to change. She's got all the history mixed up. So wouldn't it be better if these people just close their mouths? You know, there's an old saying that it's better to stay silent and have the world think you're a bit of a fool than open your mouth and prove it conclusively.
It's not the first time.
Sarah Hanson Young has done that.
And she's done it on several occasions. If you go back to 2016, if you remember the superannuation debacle.
Oh, yeah, she's made a whole bunch of errors, and I sent something out on Twitter today. She's actually spelled Captain Cook, Capitan Cook. Capitan Cook. So she can't even spell captain. I think when you make so many errors, you're better off sitting in your office doing nothing, Sarah Hanson Young, just proving to people that you don't know what you're talking about.
And then in 2014, she thought that the television drama Sea Patrol was a documentary series.
Yet we have a television show publicising techniques that you're using for border security at airports. We have another television show, of course, about the Coast Guards. There does seem to be a little bit of a double standard here.
Sorry, Senator, the TV show about the Coast Guards, is that the fictional Sea Patrol program?
That Senator Hanson Young has the decency to withdraw the accusation, which clearly was false.
I'd stand by it. I won't be withdrawing it.
So you won't have the decency to withdraw what was clearly a false accusation.
I'm not going to have I stand by what I said.
You'll say anything.
I won't have any more discussion across the committee. Thank you.
No regard to the truth.
Thank you.
I'm just say whatever you like.
I read the exact word.
Love it. Makes great fodder for radio, Mark.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it tell you a lot? Lisa McClune was in that show, wasn't she? The well-known actress.
She was.
Sarah Hanson Young thought she was actually part of a Coast Guard boat.
That's exactly right.
She thought it was a documentary.
She did.
Oh, boy.
She needs to get out
more. She
doesn't
know a lot, does she?
Just quickly, is the government really considering a half-Senate election? There's been talk about that this weekend. I suppose Pauline Hanson's thrown a spanner in the works when she has come out this week and put their plans astray, has she not?
Well, she has. She opposed the corporate tax cuts, then she supported it, then she opposed it, and they look like they're well and truly sunk now. But you'd only have, a half-Senate election, you know, most people weren't even born when the last one was held in 1970. It's when half the Senate is elected, but not the House, so you can't change the government. It's like a Senate by-election, if you like.
Right.
And it's expensive, normally results in the government getting a kick in the pants. And when you have a look at the numbers, there's not a lot for the government to gain with this strategy. That sure, they want to change the composition of the Senate, and they'd probably pick up an extra spot in Tasmania, but they'd lose one in South Australia. And I think once you look at the numbers, 6 to be elected in every state, half Senate, they wouldn't be better off. So I think it's highly unlikely they'd go down that path. They've got to hold a Senate election, I think, sometime before the middle of May next year. And you don't necessarily, under the Constitution, have to do it with the House of Representatives. But it would be seen as an absolute measure of desperation, because what it would mean is that the government in the House could stay on until November next year. That is, serve 4 months beyond the 3-year term and go to the end of next year before a House of Representatives election. So it would be seen as a political trick and strategy of the worst possible kind, and I don't see how, looking at the numbers, the government would have a more friendly Senate than what they've got now.
Yeah, very true. And the other thing is, just quickly, a final comment, is the fact that people don't want to go back to the polls again.
It doubles your electoral pain.
It really does.
You've got to go one day for a half Senate, and then you've got to go for the House of Representatives on another polling day. The public don't like it. It costs a lot. There's a few pundits advocating this, but I don't think it's going to get off first base.
Well, leave it there. Got to go to the news. Mark Latham's Outsiders. That's the Facebook page you go to if you want to continue the conversation with some of the articles we've been talking about and the stories that we've been talking about this afternoon. Thank you, Mark, as always.
Okay, pleasure. Thanks, Brent.
Talk to you next weekend.
For sure. Cheers.
Go the Bunnies.